So most Christians have no problem praying for Israel. But what if supporting Israel isn't only something we do spiritually? What if the way we think about our money, our investments, and our future says something about what we actually believe about God's promises? Now, for years, we've been told that Israel is a place of constant conflict, uncertainty, and risk. Yet while the headlines focus on war and crisis, something very different has been happening beneath the surface. Israel's economy has been growing. Its technology is shaping the world. And some investors are beginning to ask a very surprising question. If God is still working through Israel, should that influence where we place our resources? So in this episode, we sit down with financial advisor and friend, Evan Liberman, who made the decision decades ago to leave America and build his life with his family in Israel. We explore the intersection of biblical stewardship, investing, and the future of the U.S. dollar, and even why some believers see Israel not only as a place worth blessing, but a place worth building alongside. Even if you've never thought about investing in Israel, this conversation may challenge how you think about money, risk, and what it means to align your resources with the things God says matters. Welcome. This is the Jewish Road Podcast. Hey, welcome to the Jewish Road Podcast. I'm Matt Davis.
Hey, you are, and I'm Ron Davis.
There we go. And we are reunited today with a long-lost friend. We didn't know where you went. I'm just kidding. You went to Israel. Welcome to the show, Evan Liberman.
Thanks for having me on, Ron. And Matt, it's good to see you after 20 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. We were together at a congregation in Irvine, California, and got to do some worship together. And so we've been separated for the amount of time that our kids have been growing up. And so none of us had kids when we last saw each other, and now we are bogged down with kids.
Exactly. Although I guess the age of our kids is getting to the place where at least mine are going in the Army and yours are probably at some point going to leave the house. So I think what we hit is the double income, no kids, and then we missed the whole growing up phase. And now that we're in the almost to be empty nesters, so that's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah. Where does that put you?
Yeah, I got 11 grandkids.
There you go.
Wow. You're way past the empty nester. You're in the bring them back for babysitting phase.
Yeah. You're at the no income, no kids. Speaking of income, let's talk about this. We're going to have a conversation about finances, investing from a biblical perspective, and we're going to mix Israel into all of this. What you lived here in the States? You were a little bit more South County. Your family was San Diego area, and then you decided we're going to move to Israel. And your wife, Sarah, is from Israel originally. But what was the instigating factor for you that said, let's go back to the land?
That's a great question. So first, it starts with I did grow up in the United States, American, of course. But at age 25, I was working in high tech, and I thought I want to make a difference in the world, in this case, in the Messianic Jewish world. How do I put my shoulder to the plow for God's kingdom in maybe a different way than my family had? And I felt like Israel is the home run for our faith if we're able to live there as a Jewish person. So I thought, let's make Aliyah, let's immigrate. Let's put my shoulder to the wheel, working for the kingdom of God there as well. So I lived here, met my wife, Sarah. She's a Messianic Jew, as you indicated, grew up here, wouldn't have found her if I hadn't come and moved here, and was working for a number of years. Then we came back to the States, had 3 kids, and that's when I met and got to know you and your family, and we served together in a congregation. But at a certain point, when our first kids were born, we had twins, which is you saw there. I was like, okay, so how am I going to have my next generation grow up in Israel if I don't make a call here that at a certain point they're going to get to have schools and friends and language elasticity is going to wane. And so when we found out that we were pregnant with our third son, we that night made application to come back to Israel and get on the system again, so that Sarah came back when she was about 9 months pregnant. So we get back into the being able to actually have a birth in a hospital in Israel. So it was most of a drive to at least have one son born in Israel, to grow them up in a place where they understand their roots culturally, but also that they can speak Hebrew fluently and that they become the first generation, so to speak, of our family living in Israel. And now it's culminating in kids going into the IDF, which I did the IDF military service as well, but they'll do a much more full and meaningful service, I think, than even I did. So that was the driver, basically, is get the family back here. I think having a next generation in Israel for me is very meaningful in the continuation of what God is doing with our people, and I can start to see my grandkids hopefully live out, what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did ultimately, just in the modern world.
You're very involved in investments and the financial picture in Israel, and so we want to have a conversation about. Why is that important? Why is that important, especially for Americans? Our stock market recently hit 50,000, which is a huge accomplishment. And there is no fortune tellers and crystal balls in the kingdom of God. He ultimately gets to see all of this. But what got you interested in looking at the crossover between our faith, the biblical word, and looking at that through a financial lens of investment in the land?
All right, that's a big question. I originally started about 25 years ago looking at stock markets. At the time, I happened to be in the United States thinking, this is really cool how money can grow on itself, and how is this a biblical concept in general? And as I started reading through some of the parables, I started realizing that Jesus talks a lot about these concepts of finance. In fact, it's one of the more talked about topics in the New Covenant. On one side, warning people about greed and relying on their finances and making bigger barns. On the other hand, wanting to be faithful with what God's given you as a steward. And so you've got the parable of the talents, whereas most people spiritualize it, and it has spiritual meanings for sure. But ultimately, it's an investment story about a person who took what he had, his resources, his talents, his finances, and as the master went away for a long period of time, he made long-term investments, but was wise in doing them and was able to double his money over a long period of time, which is something, for example, that can be done in the stock market, but not in a short period. But in a long period, you'll double or triple your money over time. And the person that was lauded, therefore, was those that took their talents and did something with them. And I believe that God has given each person talents, whether it be abilities or time or a certain personality that does well in certain situations, or their finances and resources to plow into what God is wanting to do. And that can return a good return in those various areas. The one person there in that servant that was not applauded was the person who didn't take any risk, decided not to do anything with his master's money, and didn't even put it in the bank to get interest. And so if we take that analogy as also relating to finances, I would say that investing is a godly thing. Being too tied up with understanding, how great I am because I've got money is not good. But to put your efforts toward, I want to make sure my money is growing, because if it's not invested, it is shrinking with inflation. And so essentially that's not being a good steward of your funds. As it relates to Israel, I started recognizing when I moved over about 30 years ago to Israel, that there's not much understanding in the Western world about what Israel is financially. There's a lot of understanding in the Christian world about God's desires to succeed Israel, to reestablish the nation, to bring the people back, and to make it a great nation again as it follows him, and to give a spiritual revival. But how does that translate in the investment world, which I was very interested in at the time, of course, as well, that I started realizing there's nothing in English. There's nothing that's actually turning to the crowd outside of Israelis to invest here. And it was much of a local phenomenon. And that was why I decided to start Wise Money Israel, to give that understanding, and more starting as an educational platform to help people to understand, why is God interested in what's going on here financially? Why would people want to partner, not just in contribution level, but also perhaps partnering on a financial level and doing well while you're doing good? And so how do we get to a two-way street with Israel financially, not just a one-way? It's been for decades, people contribute to Israel, but don't ever see it coming back to them. In this way, you can actually grow your contribution potential through investing and growing your funds. But then the more people started being educated, they wanted us to manage investment accounts. We set up a company to do that. And today we're a registered investment advisor firm, both here in Israel and the United States, to facilitate that investment in Israeli stocks and bonds. And it's grown in what we're managing, the amount of clients and the amount of employees and that sort of thing over the years. But it still resonates with Christians, but even more so now, especially as they start to see the volatility in the markets, in their home markets. We work with about 30 different nations around the world, but specifically in the United States, there's a lot of volatility as to where can I invest? Where am I not going to have crashes? How can I diversify? How can I perhaps invest outside of the United States? Because there's what's called the home bias. People generally like to invest in things they know. So if they go to Costco, they want to invest in Costco stocks. If they eat at McDonald's, they like the idea of investing in McDonald's because they like the food. Maybe they don't like the food, but they at least like the concept that other people like the food. And therefore they feel comfortable in that. But the unfortunate thing is that's going to have them investing in a portfolio of American companies only, US dollar denominated only. And that doesn't mean America is always going to have the best stock market. It's always going to have the best currency. And so as the times become more troubled, especially regarding the strength or lack thereof of the dollar globally, they start to realize I'm accidentally allowing my funds to erode. So even if I'm making 8% in the stock market, if inflation is 3%, I'm eroding at the level of 5%. And if the dollar is weakening by 5% against other world currencies, I'm essentially not making progress at all. I'm becoming effectively like that one servant who's not actually progressing his master's money in a real way, in a buying cost of buying power way. So I would say, as Americans start to see the potential things that are happening with national debt and de-dollarization potential, and BRICS nations want to create an alternate reserve currency to the dollar, which would really shake the foundations of the supply and demand equation with the dollar, to diversify internationally is what a lot of portfolio managers are now talking about. And whether that means Israel or means other nations, other markets, London or Australia and other currencies, whether it be the shekel or the euro or the pound, just getting that diversification is a very biblical concept I think is starting to resonate more, both from a fear perspective, meaning, oh my gosh, what's happening with my money and my investments, but also biblically speaking, the book of Ecclesiastes talks about dividing your wealth in 7 or 8 different ways because you don't know what's going to come upon the earth, what calamity is going to come upon the earth. So Solomon was a very wise steward of the resources God gave him and decided, I need to diversify internationally. In that case, sending his ships to 7 or 8 different markets. And I think the same thing applies today.
All right. This is your chance to ask all of your questions, because he's always coming to me with, look at this, or did you see this? Or I don't know, maybe I should go into gold, but here's your opportunity. You got free advice here.
Yeah. Well, we were talking a little bit before about, the fact that, we're constantly getting bombarded with, advertisements and all of these different, perspectives that the dollar is going away. If you have your money in a bank, get it out. If you, if you're investing here or there, you got to be careful because everything is going to crash. And, I haven't found that happening yet, but, is this a scare tactic or what is this?
I do think there are real reasons why the dollar is weakening over time. In fact, there's some governments and administrations in the United States that recognize from an export-import perspective, it's actually good to have a weak dollar. You can actually buy more products internationally, as America is generally an import country. So I don't know if it's scare tactics as much as it is real economics. And I do think that the concept of, for the last 50 years, the American dollar has been the world reserve currency. Euro at some point took about a 22% now chunk out of that, and that threw the dollar somewhat. But if you have China and India and Brazil and other, perhaps even OPEC nations start to de-dollarize, meaning they're not doing their, let's say, large international oil transactions in the US dollar, then suddenly the dollar doesn't need to be used all the time. You suck out a lot of the demand for the dollar, and it's all based on supply and demand. And so when there's not a demand to buy dollars, its value goes down. And one of the reasons is America has been able to carry such a large national debt is because the dollar has always been propped up strongly because of America's geopolitical power in the world to force people, so to speak, over many decades and wars to a situation where they're always doing work in the dollar. They're always transacting large transactions, especially petrodollars. Once that doesn't exist, or America even loses a little bit of its footing as far as the world unchallenged superpower, then you have countries wanting to create other currencies to do business in. And then you lose the demand for the dollar. And then the national debt problem really kicks in. Right now, Congress can kick it down the road, another administration. But debt is, as you know, is about 38 trillion at this point in the United States.
Yeah.
But that means debt to GDP, which is one of the ratios that analysts look at country over country, is about 129% in America, which means they're creating more debt than they're able to service with their income. Their GDP is X and their debt is higher every year. If you were a family, you would never let that situation go on. You wouldn't be able to go on for long. Eventually the bank would repossess your assets. Well, the world can't do that yet with the United States. And so it continues to grow its national debt. At a certain point, there'll be a tipping point. The market right now in the United States is about 30 price earnings ratio, which is definitely high for investing. So while the market goes up, the earnings aren't going up in lockstep. And so you're seeing a bubble being created even in the stock market, which might be a trigger, for example, for some form of a reset of the US dollar. And that's why I say, even if you're in S&P 500 and you're making good percentages gain year over year, there's nothing compared to the Israeli stock market. And we could talk about that if you want. But you're also potentially in a stage which are very tied to the US dollar. And that's not good. You need to diversify in many different currencies and markets.
So I buy in and love the idea of diversification. And you just brought it up. Make the case for investing in Israel. Because from the outside, obviously we love Israel. We love the people of Israel. But it feels like even making travel plans to Israel is tenuous, right? You don't know when the next thing is going to go off and the bottom drops out. So how is Israel doing from a financial perspective?
It's a great question. By the way, I think the not getting the flights to Israel is very much of an effect that's happened in the last 2 years. I think if we go back to last 40 years, we didn't have what we had in this last 2 years. So there was definitely a few times in which flights were definitely getting canceled. But hopefully that won't continue. That's not Israel's norm. What Israel's norm is, though, from a financial perspective or an economic perspective, to answer your question, Matt, is we look at things like gross domestic product. We look at debt to GDP. We look at unemployment, interest rates, growth of markets, currency strength. We look at all those things. And there's a great website called tradingeconomics.com that we go to a lot to see and compare countries. And so there you'll see, for example, that Israel's gross domestic product, what is the country able to create as far as income and value in the world with products and services, grows annually by a certain percentage. And that's how you compare countries, how well are they doing? Kind of like if you're going to compare families, one's making $100,000 a year and one's making 50. So in this case, Israel is the 100,000, and America, let's say, and other OECD nations or developed Western economies are growing at about 2% per year. They're able to generate more real income. Whereas Israel's have been about 4% growth rate for about the last decade or two. We don't see that also being rattled very much by wars. So if we look, for example, even in our last war here that's still going on, even over the last 2 years, we've seen that the gross domestic product has continued to grow. It was shaken a little bit in the first few quarters, but it never went negative. So we didn't even have any negative growth. And it's returned back to about 3% today, and looking forward, 2026 is projected to be about 4.5%. So we're getting already back to the place in which our growth rate is continuing to be double the other world nations. We look at debt. We look at debt to GDP. We're at 62% at the beginning of the war, 69% currently, and will likely go back down. That's half of the United States. And so we're not creating as much debt as the United States is. We're able to grow much beyond our earnings power. Another thing that people look at is things like interest rates. Are we in an interest rate decreasing environment that's good for the economy? And we have been lowering interest rates recently. Unemployment is low. Total debt per capita, meaning how much does each individual Israeli owe, is half of what each individual American owes because of the government debt. So there's a lot of good reasons why the Israeli economy is in where it is. And that's one of the reasons the stock market keeps growing at a rate higher than Wall Street. And there's also the concept of technology exports. So Israel is known, as you know, as the startup nation. And what that means is not just that we have more startups per capita than almost any nation in the world, and more on a nominal basis, even the numerical, than any country's 10 times our size. But it also means that it sets in a dynamic that we are exporting our technologies to the rest of the world, whether it be agricultural technology, financial technologies, military, AI, and IT technologies. But it also means that the way we do it is by exiting. If you've heard of the big exits that Israel, Wiz was sold for $32 billion to Google recently. And what that means is all those dollars come back to Israel to pay taxes. And our tax rates are very high here. And so probably half of that 32 billion comes back into our economy as dollars. Those more dollars are searching for less shekels, the same amount of shekels, but more dollar demand for those shekels, and increases the value of our currency. And that's structurally built into an innovative startup technology-based economy. And so that creates a scenario in which the currency is growing in strength over time. And that's one of the things we encourage when people invest here is not only going to make a good investment gain over time over the long pull. We can't guarantee any returns any particular year, of course, but we've done really well over the long pull, of course. But in addition to your investment gains, you're going to see currency gains. So we talked about before the diversification approach, which is good in general. You'll lower your risk by averaging across many different currencies if you're investing in many different nations, or even just have currencies in different countries. But additionally, since you have a strong currency in the shekel, structurally speaking, over the last 2 decades, the shekel, for example, has gained about 60% against the dollar. And so if someone came in with $100,000, put it in shekels, didn't want to take any investment risk at all, they would have $160,000 value in the shekel today. When you compound that with, of course, investments of those shekels over time, beating the S&P 500 in pretty much every time measure, then you have kind of, I feel like, the perfect storm or the perfect trifecta, in that you're investing in Israel from a values perspective. You're saying, I want to be standing with Israel. I want to do what God is calling me to do, which is be supportive of the Jewish people. And a lot of the Jewish people, of course, are in this land. But I also want to make sure I'm diversified out of my currency, at least for a little bit, maybe 10% of my funds. I want outside the dollar. I want a good investment gain. That's the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. We can talk about that more. And then being in the shekel. And so all those criteria come together, I think, to resonate really well with a lot of the believers around the world specifically, but also those they're just looking for diversified economic sanity. And that is getting into Israel. It seems to be, over the long pull, a good move.
Trying to wrap my head around all of this, and talking about diversification, when we invest here from the United States and we diversify in a lot of different, I don't know what you call them, companies or whatever, that are here, but also outside. And what you're representing is we want to also, be a blessing to Israel, and we want to be able to diversify in that area. What are the people in the homeland, Israel, when they diversify? Why doesn't it just stay there? And they go out, though, and diversify in other places, if I'm understanding this.
Yeah, you do understand it correctly. Israelis, for the most part, also stick to the diversification principle. They're investing not only in Israel, but they're investing in global economies like Wall Street, but they're going to the East as well, and Singapore and Shanghai and these sorts of places. They want to diversify as well. There's an interesting effect that it was always considered, okay, well, I need to go to Wall Street. And those funds, those institutions, those investors here in Israel that were chasing the American dream and the US dollar have been sorely underperforming, especially for the last 2.5 years of the war, and now they're coming back in droves to the Israeli market because they realize, I guess my home market is actually pretty strong. My home currency is pretty strong. Israel does have a good future. But you look at basically the believers here in Israel, about 0.3%. So you've got 99% of the population are not thinking God is for our nation. There is a God at all. And if he is, why is he interested in us? And so the concept is, I'm just a citizen of the world. And so you don't have a whole bunch of people that are thinking like maybe some of the believers outside are, which is there is actually something special in Israel. There's some reason why I want to be part of what's going on there. They just were born this way. I'm Israeli, but I'm a citizen of the world. How can I get diversified in the world? And it hasn't paid off necessarily in recent times for sure.
If
That's essentially, if I can add to that, sorry, Matt,
Yeah.
if I can add to that, that's one of the reasons why we started the firm Wise Money Israel, is while we're licensed both in the United States and here, and we can invest globally for Israelis, we decided, you know what, we have certain Israeli clients that are, but we want to invest them in the Israeli market. And we've got a lot of clients from many different nations. We want to invest them in Israel. That's why the name Wise Money Israel is what it is. We're focusing on Israel because we think God structurally is for this nation over the long pull. Any given year can go up and down, but we see this growth of the nation and we want to be part of it, and we want others to come along with us.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask, is going from a biblical perspective. Obviously, you are a follower of Yeshua, the Messiah. So you're not just taking economic principles; you're leveraging biblical principles. And if we actually believe what it says in the book, then we should maybe base our life off of it, right? Like not just morally and how we treat one another, but how we're investing our money and our funds. So what does that look like to look at Israel as an investment opportunity from a purely biblical, like we look at the future of Israel? Why is Israel the place to be investing and diversifying funds?
I would say that if for those that are reading their scriptures and going back through the Tanakh, you would see starting in Genesis 12, that God is blessing Abraham and he's going to bless his descendants. And then that blessing passes on in Genesis, of course, to Isaac and to Jacob and to the people of today, the Jewish people, and talks about the land being a special place for this people, and that he will succeed us as we're following him and as his plan is developing. And so I think the culmination of that is, and we see it throughout the scriptures, that God is going to prosper us as a nation, in Zechariah and in other places. And what we see is God says, I'm going to bring you back to your nation. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, I'm sure with you as Messianic Jews as well, is that God is promised to bring us back to our land to never be scattered again. And that, I believe, is what's happened in the last 140 years or so with the first waves of Aliyah, and has developed into a modern nation that is just seeming to go from good to better. So I think just looking at the scriptures, you say, God wants me to be blessing the people of Israel. That can be not just financially, it can be lots of other ways. But to be part of what's going on here in the anti-Israel climate of today, it's taking a stand. It's saying, not the BDS movement, the boycott, diversify, and sanction movement, or the anti-Israel, anti-Semitism that's going on in the world, to say Israel is bad. No, I am actually wanting to say Israel is a good place to be. God is for this land. God has got a covenant with this land. How do I participate in it? Additionally, as believers and as a believer-run firm, we're also interested, even in the Israeli market, since we're investing in secular companies, to make sure that they're not plowing into and developing things that are anti-biblical. And so we put what's called a biblical responsible investing screen on everything that we do fundamental analysis on. And so even if an Israeli company is really good, but for example, it produces a particular drug that is used in abortions, then we're not going to invest in that company because that would be going against biblical principles. And so when investors come to us, they're not only wanting to invest in Israel as a country, in the people, and what's God doing with us as an economy and bringing back the wealth of the nations to Israel, as he had wanted from the start to us be a blessing to the nations, that additionally, they can know that when they're investing here, they're going to be investing in companies that are not going against their scriptural values.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Are you going to book a meeting right after this?
Yeah, that's a lot to take in here.
It is a lot to absorb. There's something that we hadn't talked about, which is we've talked about the values based. We've talked about diversification. We've talked about why would a believer want to invest here specifically, and versus Venezuela or or Brazil. Another thing that talks to people, and especially talks to non-believers, but can talk to believers as well, is just the pure motive of, I want my resources to multiply and in a safe way. And where's that going to be? And one of the measures of that, of course, is the stock market and how is it doing? And I've alluded to the fact that in the last 2 years of war, one would expect that the markets would go down. One would expect that when you have less economic potential because you've got hundreds of thousands of people in reserves and fighting off the jihadists in various fronts, that's bad for the economy. And so one would have expected that our stock market would go down, continue to go down until we get out of war, which we are not yet out of. But what we see, if anyone looks up a chart of our stock market, let's say the Tel Aviv 125 index, which is like the S&P 500 in the United States, our largest 125 companies, what we saw is that the stock market is so resilient such that the October 7th start of the war did bring down our stock market. It was obviously a surprise to the system and very tragic from a human perspective, but the market only experienced a 3-week drop. And then a classic V pattern that we've seen over the last 30 or so years of conflicts here, that we've had them every 7-8 years. Basically, the market goes down, and then people say, that's a little bit overdone. I think Israel is still going to be a nation. It's still going to survive. Its economy is not going to fall apart. And so you see a classic V pattern develop in the stock market chart. And then within another 7 weeks, the market had fully recovered. So while the war had not ceased, and there continued to be lots of fighting and damage, and emotionally was heart-wrenching for the last 2.5 years, the stock market had digested whatever potential economic damage would be done with this 7-front existential war, and continued to grow about another 120% in the subsequent 2 years. And so that's what we've seen. And that's when I allude to the fact that Israel has outperformed Wall Street on many time frames. The last 2 years has been outstanding. Just to give you an understanding of it, the Israeli stock market on a U.S. dollar basis, to compare to the United States, for example, has gone up 172% in the last 2 years, which by any measure is way outsized any market. But if we compare, let's say, to the Standard & Poor's 500, it returned 38%, which is a great return in and of itself over 2 years. But if you compare 170 or so percent to 38, you can just see the outperformance that could have been had investing 2 years ago in this market. Obviously, we'll see what happens going forward. But I think with some follow-on to the Abraham Accords, with some peace, with some sense that especially from foreign investors of institutions, the risk tolerance, the risk premium, I should say, has gone down. Israel is seen as a safer place because they came against us, like every Jewish holiday celebrates the 3 things of every Jewish holiday. They came against us. We defeated them. Let's eat. So I think we're going to get to the let's eat part because we've defeated essentially the enemies. I think it's not just Israel's IDF and our ingenuity, but it's God bringing us to the place where he wants to bring us through some of these world events. We have to go through these geopolitical upheavals in the region, but ultimately God's causing us to have the upper hand, and that's playing out not only in military, but it's playing out in the economy.
Wow. Yeah, this is amazing because I think the vast majority of people out there, and I put myself in that group as well, that, we don't really know where to invest. We want to invest, and we want to make sure we're taking care of us and our family.
Right.
But we also, if there's the opportunity to invest and bless Israel at the same time, how do people go about doing that?
So one of the reasons why we're registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission as a firm is so that we can offer investors in the United States and actually around many different nations around the world to invest in a U.S. broker-dealer firm. And so you have all the guarantees of SEC regulation of the brokerage firm where your funds are held, but you're giving us as a firm to be your financial advisor, your fiduciary, to manage your investments, not necessarily in your home market. And so you have an investment account, whether it be a joint account, an individual account, a business account, NGO account, nonprofit, a trust account. There's all kinds of minor accounts, IRA accounts that you can open up. And we have us manage it at a U.S. broker-dealer, but investing in Israeli securities, whether it be bonds or stocks. and in Israeli shekels. And so you get kind of the best of the both worlds. You get that first world U.S. experience of putting your funds into a registered licensed broker dealer. It's been managing $1 trillion of client funds of millions of clients in America, with the regulations and the tax forms that go with the United States when you make gains, etc. But investing in the actual account with someone who understands the Israeli market, understands value-based investing, and in a currency, in a market that you want to be invested in. So that's the sweet spot. Opening an investment account takes about 25 minutes to open an account online, and then transferring funds domestically from your bank account online. And then we'll sit on an investment questionnaire with a client through Zoom, going over their financial situation, determine should they be investing in stocks and bonds in these sectors and those sectors, trying to tailor a portfolio for each client. And then we get going making the money.
Yeah. I think that it's obvious that you are one who has the understanding of all of these things. Given some of the uncertainties in the world, is there ever an uh-oh moment where, we've got to do something, we're in trouble, or, how does that factor in?
Okay, that's a great question. It's something that retail investors deal with a lot, which is they say there's two emotions in the market. There's fear and there's greed. And so when the market is going up by 170%, obviously everyone's into the greed, and they want to put in as much money as they can into that market or into that currency. And when it goes against them, they're in the fear, and I need to batten down the hatches and go to cash. And generally speaking, when you have a professional managing your account, there's a level of indirection, a level of lack of emotion going into it, because we're interested, of course, in seeing our clients stay with us long term and making as much money as possible. But when the crisis comes, we've been in the market enough decades to recognize that this too will pass. These crises, whether it be globally or regionally or economically, do pass. And it's a matter of how long it takes that I have to hold on to my seat tightly before they pass. So as an example, the global recession in 2008 and 2009 took about 2 years in the United States, about a year and a half here to recover. And we were seeing markets go down wholesale by tens of percent, and sometimes relatively quickly within months. And so those investors that were able to hold themselves from cashing in their losses saw a great return in 2009 in America to 28% on the S&P 500 and 89% here. And so as long as you can get through those times of crisis, you'll likely make money over time in any stock market, much less in Israel. There are times, for example, at the beginning of the war, the first 2 weeks here were kind of scary. We didn't know we were going to respond, how we're going to respond. We had a ton of hostages, and something went really wrong with our defense systems. So at certain points in time, we might take a little bit of a more of a conservative approach to our investing. We might want, let's say someone has a stock and a bond portfolio, we might shift perhaps a little bit to bonds, but generally speaking, we're contrarian to the market. We recognize the effect of not panicking, and we're a little bit removed from that emotion that the client has typically. And so we're usually buying on the way down and buying on the way up, because for the long pull, this is one of the scriptural securities that we have, so to speak, is when God says, this is a nation that I'm not only going to bless ultimately, but I'm not going to bring them back from the land to ever be scattered again. So if there's any nation in the world that you can say God is backing this nation, ultimately, maybe not every move that the government of Israel makes today, God is backing. But as a long-term prognosis of Israel, it's a place where you can feel secure that at least that nation is not going to be wiped out.
Yeah. Not good?
Well, we definitely don't want to be the one who took his one talent and buried it.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, so some people don't know just how much, there's a whole movement out there called the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanction. And so it's this movement globally for those who hate Israel, want to come against the Jewish people, to basically say, if it was made in Israel, if it's a Jewish thing, don't use it. And what they don't realize in the long run is just how much is coming from Israel. I think people sometimes miss that, Waze, which is a directional, navigation like Google Maps or something like that, is from Israel. The platform that we're using right now to have this conversation is called Riverside, and this is an Israeli company. There's so much there. How much more is there, and why is God blessing all of this fruitfulness out of the minds and the hearts of the people in Israel?
That's great. I'm glad you know some of the innovations that are coming out of Israel. Waze actually was bought by Google Maps, and so it is driving Google Maps today. If you look at some of the technologies of the last 20 years, whether it be a disk on key, the whole concept of solid state memory, which is used in everything now, essentially SanDisk was the pioneer of that, and still an Israeli company sold on the exchanges. And things like voice over IP, the technology we're using now in all of social media is essentially based on something that Israel made popular in the year 2000. Firewalls is made popular by Checkpoint. That's an Israeli company we're investing in. Things like SodaStream that people are using, drip irrigation, some of the AI technology, for sure missile defense that Trump is talking about, the Golden Dome for Israel, for America, which is essentially mimicking what's already been done and innovated here. Now we're going to Iron Beam, which is laser technology to stop against missiles. And so there's just a lot of technology. The Intel chips are developed here. So some of the reason for some of these weird names that you used to hear about, some of the chips are being developed by Intel for all the world's computers, essentially had these really weird names like Merom. And you're like, what is a Merom? Well, it's a mountain in Israel. And so, yeah, the technology is staggering what's actually being used in the world. The reason for it, I'm honestly not sure. I like to be an expert where I'm an expert. In this case, the only thing I can deposit is that God does want the nation to be reestablished well, and for there to be a draw for bringing all the Jews of the world back. And I'm just going to throw something out here. There's half the Jews in the world like you that are still in the United States. And how is God going to draw the people back? It's either going to be through persecution or it's going to be through the desire to increase your lifestyle. And right now, maybe Israel is seen as not that, but we're coming up in the world, and that may be part of his desire, is to make us a joy to the nations. That's scriptural. What's going to look like? The desert blossoming as a rose. There's a reason God is wanting Israel to be a blessing to the nations. That's what he promised Abraham to make us. And I think we're doing that in technology today. I think we're doing that in some of the innovations that we're doing. But I think ultimately God's purpose is also to have us spiritually as a light to the nations. I think that's what's happening here in the body of Messiah. And so all different roads that he can bring his end time prophecy to fulfillment here, he'll do. And that may be why we're seeing some of the success in the economy and the markets here and the innovation.
I think for people who are listening right now, some of you caught 50% of this, and you used lots of initials and things that over my head. You're far smarter than me, maybe even you a little bit there. In terms
in my
of
one place in life, maybe I'm smarter than you, but everything else I'm not smarter than you.
We all have a lane, right? So there's a lane that and thank God, people have certain intelligence in certain areas because we all need each other. And so this is certainly a place that we're called to be wise with what we've been given. And so I hope that if anything, that for those of you who are listening, that you would just start to consider, number one, if you're not investing in anything, you need to invest, and you need to be growing, protecting your legacy and your future, and to be able to pass that on generationally. And at the same time, man, what a great and refreshing thought is not just to look at what we can do and invest here in the United States, but man, God is up to something certainly in Israel. So we want to send people over to be able to learn more and to have a conversation with you. Where would they go to start that?
They go to our website, wisemoneyisrael.com. The name of the company, of course, is Wise Money Israel. You can search on Google and find us. And generally what people do is they click on the free consultation button at the top of the website and sets up a Zoom call. And we just go over their financial situation, their desire of investing in Israel. How does it look from their perspective? What's their risk tolerance. We've got government bonds, corporate bonds for more capital preservation style portfolios. And then we have more aggressive or hybrid bond stock portfolios for other investors. And that's how we get started.
Love it. Well, we'll send people that way.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go myself.
Sounds good. I'll be talking with you after the interview.
Yeah.
Well, Evan,
good.
thank
Good
you
catching
for,
up with both of you.
Yeah, thanks for showing up and coming on the Jewish Road podcast. Shalom.
Shalom. להתראות.
Shalom.